Thanks again for joining us. I'm going to jump right in. For follow-up, you can contact your project manager or support, which is our either phone or email, insightsupport@2020spaces.com, if you want to schedule a deeper dive or a more detailed discussion about how this version might help you. So let's get going. All right, so Insight version 10 is available now in English, and if you want a German translation, you'll have to wait until the end of January. Some of the sort of the top key areas of development for version 10 include invoicing. We've redesigned the sales invoicing functionality to support the ability to do collective invoicing, which I'll spend quite some time on. Product version identities, which is the ability to order by either customer part numbers or like UPC type codes, if you have those, as an alias to an existing product version with a configuration. Some usability enhancements to the project module, and then I'll cover sort of a few of the more important enhancements and several other functional areas of the software. So what do we mean by consolidated or collective invoicing? Simply, it means that now you can invoice across sales orders. So you can combine invoiceable items from multiple sales orders to the same customer or the same buying group into a single invoice. So if you do project-based business, progressive or progress-based billing, or you have customers who just want to get a monthly invoice for everything they order because they're a regular customer, we've modified the native invoice structure to support that, as well as provided some functionality to make that easier to implement. And in the past, and some of you may have done this already, if you wanted to consolidate invoices, it required some significant customization, including changes to the database. So I kind of this is sort of the first step in a series of enhancements. So in addition to this sort of architectural change, which is actually not that drastic, so don't panic. It really is just a new table and a slightly different sort of primary keying on the database. So the invoices themselves essentially look the same, but there's some additional data around them. What this does, though, is opens us up to be able to provide some standard functions in the future for things like monthly billing, automated monthly billing, automated project billing, or progress billing. And so we'll start to roll out actions and functions in the future that will support some of those types of typical consolidated invoicing requirements. And I'm actually just going to jump into the software here. So this is the sales invoices form. The look and feel of the form is essentially the same, but I have a new tab on the details form called line selection. So I've got my invoice header. Should be used, should look like what you're used to, unless you're on a really old version. Invoice lines are the same. So if there's something that has multiple order items, GL distribution, and so on. But now we also have a line selection tab. And what this allows you to do, actually I'm in the wrong, I've got a couple of environments open here. Is, bear with me, sorry about that. That's what I get for having too many databases. So what this allows you to do is generate what we are calling invoiceables. So an invoiceable is an order line or part of an order line or an order price or a charge line that's ready to invoice. So that, in other words, there's an action that needs to run at an appropriate time in the order life cycle that will generate an invoiceable record for anything that needs to be invoiced. And then those different invoiceable records can be added to invoices. So our existing system actions for create invoice by sales order and create invoice by shipment are still in place, and they will create a complete invoice and the associated invoiceable data. But if you want to do things like a custom invoice creation logic for a project or progress or monthly billing, you can use some new system actions which will create invoiceable entries, and then you can have a custom action that will combine those invoiceables onto an invoice. However, in addition to automating that through customization, you can also do it manually. So I can actually create an invoice manually, which I was not able to do through the user interface before, and add line items to that invoice. So if there are qualifying line items for this customer, for example, that are not yet assigned to an invoice, I will see on the line selection tab all the available invoiceables. And if I want to add them to this particular invoice, I can select that. If the invoice is not firmed, I can do a pushover to assign that invoiceable entry to a given invoice. So again, this then in the future can support consolidation of invoices of multiple sales orders onto a single invoice. Okay, so the legacy functionality that is the standard way of invoicing by order or by shipment is still supported, but now you have some additional flexibility for assigning items to invoices. And it's really not much more complicated than that. We've created this concept of an invoiceable record and the ability to either automatically or manually link those invoiceables to an invoice, and then from there on, it's essentially the same as what you're used to if you're using our invoicing functionality. So again, we kind of covered some of this stuff. There are some additional changes because we're now able to combine invoices across sales orders. There is a new way of calculating taxes. If you don't change anything on upgrade, you don't have to use this new action. I do need to note, and this is important, that this action, the sales invoice validation action, is being scripted in on upgrade, so you may have to go in immediately and remove it if you don't want taxes recalculated. So if you're only doing a single invoice per sales order or a single invoice per sales order per shipment, just standard invoicing logic, you don't need this action in place if you're happy with the way taxes are being prorated today. But if you do decide to consolidate, then taxes need to be calculated essentially at an invoice level rather than just bringing forward the sales tax price rules from the sales order into the invoice, because there could be a mix of order lines from a bunch of different orders. So trying to prorate against all these different orders didn't really make sense anymore. So this action will recalculate taxes for the invoice itself using the invoice date as the tax rule effectivity date, and is part of the workflow. So it's an action in the invoices workflow that will need to be deployed. And also note, of course, that it may result because tax rate may be different from the sales order date, or if you're combining invoices across orders, they may not, they may round slightly differently because of that combining. Therefore, you may get a different tax amount on the invoice, slightly different than what was calculated on the original sales order. So if you do decide to deploy this new action, you're going to want to treat the taxes on the sales order as estimated taxes when you acknowledge to the customer, and then the actual taxes will be calculated per invoice. There is also a new invoice number field available. So we haven't gotten rid of the invoice ID, but there's now a standard system field and a standard system action that will provide an independent sequential invoice number. And then, of course, that action can be overridden if you need, for some reason, need to do a custom invoice numbering function. So we have some customers around the world that, for example, legally they're not allowed to skip an invoice number, and with an ID-based numbers that can happen. If you allow your, for example, an invoice to be deleted, then you can lose invoice numbers from the system. So this is an independent field that uses a last number used type logic that is independent of the ID. So we're not getting rid of any of the old data. We're just adding a new field. So again, if you're happy with the way it works, you shouldn't have to make any changes to continue using the invoicing as is, but there's this new option available. Note that it is an integer field, so it's not designed to be text plus numbers. It is just a numeric field or integer. Again, because as soon as you introduce text, it's hard to keep track of if numbers were skipped and so on. A note that in order to combine items onto a collective invoice, there are certain data on the invoiceable entries themselves that have to be common to those records or to those entries. So it's obviously got to be for the same customer. We're requiring the same order currency, the same tax location code, at the moment the same payment terms because of terms discounting, the same invoice type, debit or credit, the same bill to address, and coming from the same order level price list, and or a buying group. So in other words, they could be in theory from a different customers but belong to the same buying group. That's okay then to combine across customers. Okay, and again, we'll save some time for questions at the end. All right, so the next item is product version identities. This is a way, and again, some of you may have custom solutions to solve this particular problem. So if so, we're catching up to you. But this is a way to be able to enter orders for product versions using an alternate ID, essentially an alternate product code or part number. So if you have customer-specific catalogs or you sell to customers who want to purchase using their own part number, or you sell to a retailer who requires a UPC code, for example, then you can, without creating a new catalog or make a copy of a product version, you can actually alias a product with these codes. What that allows you to do is sell products from a common catalog, which helps you on, minimize your data maintenance under various item numbers without duplicating all of the product version data or all of the catalog data. And you can sell the same product to different customers with different numbers, and electronic order importing is supported with these product version identities. So if you're getting EDI orders, from a customer that uses their own part numbering, you can import those electronically without having to, do any mapping to, on your product version. So again, I'm just going to switch over to the software here. And what this looks like is I'm on the product versions form, and I've just selected one of my product versions. And on product versions, there's a new tab called Identities. So we call it, it's like an alias, we call it an identity. I can have any number of alternate identities for this particular product version. And there are 4 types supported out of the box, and you can add your own custom types. So today, we call it an identity method. That consists of a customer order number, customer part number, GTIN, which is sort of the European international version of UPC. We support EAN, which is the European article number, and also the UPC code. And those have edit masks to support proper formatting. But there is a lookup table where you can also add your own types if you need to, or identity methods, and even provide your own custom procedures or functions to control or auto-identify, auto-create the ID number itself if you need to. So the way I set those up is I simply add that with the identity method. I put in the desired ID. I can give it an alternate description. If it's the type ID method of customer, you have to select what customer it's for, so that I can have multiple customers ordering the same part number under either the same or different part numbers. And in addition to defining this alternate product ID, I can also predefine one or more options. So I can leave the options either completely open so that at order entry, the order entry person can type in the appropriate option codes, or I can lock down every option value to essentially what would be a SKU. Or I can do some of both. So in this example, I've supplied options for these features, but the other features are open for edit. So it gives you really maximum flexibility in terms of how you define these unique product identities, whether they're a fully specified product that's fully constrained, or whether it's they still have certain options available to them. The way that looks in a sales order is I input the product part number by that alternate identity. The system will validate and recognize that it's an alias for my standard product codes. So you'll see both in the order. The order line and product description will be the alternate description. And in this example, I've actually got the same product in the same order under two different IDs. In addition, any options that are pre-specified on the identity will be shown, but they will be locked for edit. And in version 10, it's a blue pin. We're actually changing that in 10.1 to like a padlock, just to indicate that they are locked. So at the moment, we're not allowing those to be modified, because the whole, if you want to allow them to be modified, then you need to leave them unassigned on the identity. Exclusions and all the other whatever constraints and set option data and so on will still be applied for the product version. And so you need to note that it is possible to create an invalid configuration for an identity. You will get the messages in order entry, so you'll want to do some basic testing with those configurations to make sure you didn't accidentally get an excluded combination of options specified or something like that. You won't be able to tell that when you create the identity. There's no real-time validation at this point within the product version form. The identities themselves are available as criteria properties, so you can reference those in pricing as well if you need to, and also in downstream processes. So these are just screenshots for posterity here. And I've covered all of this. I'm just putting them in the recording here. And again, as I mentioned, there are two new system criteria properties: product identification number and product identification method. The method's important because, in theory, I could have the same number for two different customers, for example, with different configurations, which would be important to understand. All right, moving on. Again, I know I'm going fairly fast here, but don't have much time. We have just added some usability enhancements to the projects form. So if you use that, hopefully these will be welcome improvements. Just to make some obvious make it easier to use, put some more information at the project form users' fingertips. So I'm just going to jump through these screenshots here. We already had a find related from the project's sales orders list to the sales order inquiry. We've also added the sales orders form now. So if a user has the right to the sales orders form, they can jump directly into that order into edit mode, so that if they need to change something on the order, they don't have to write the number down and go into the sales order form. Is just a much quicker way to get to where you're going. We've added contacts to projects, and not only in the projects form, but also in sales orders and purchase orders. We've also added the ability to add new contacts on the fly from within that transaction. So if I'm on a project and there's a new contact, I don't have to go to the stop what I'm doing and go out to the contact form. I can add a contact in context of the work I'm doing, and that, again, that is available now on sales orders and on purchase orders as well. We've added a resource summary to a project. So it's important to note we don't load that data with the form. There is a refresh button that's required to load it because we realize that could cover, we have customers who have hundreds of orders, so that query could take a bit of, a few moments to run, and so we're not just going to do it when we open the form. But this does allow you to kind of have a high-level snapshot of the total material requirements related to a project. And that's, again, once the bills of material have been generated in Insight for the related sales orders, that data is available, into this resource summary. We've added multi-note to projects as well. And again, you can define your own project note types in the lookup tables. And we've also added an auto number function. So if you would like to, create your, an automatic definition for project numbering, there is a tab now under the system configuration for projects under sales order management where you can enable the auto number. You can define a fixed prefix and a number of digits for the number. And after that setting is enabled, if you add a new project, it'll show auto number here in the project field and generate a new number. All right, so those are some of the bigger projects we worked on for V10, but here's a sort of a longer list of no less exciting things. I will imagine that all of you, in my mind, I'm hearing cheers go up as I explain what this is all about here. So we have finally developed a way to intercept the most common SQL Server database error messages and turn them into human-readable language. So many of you, if you've worked with the system, have probably gotten one of these very confusing-looking errors in the past, because those are generated by the database when there are database constraints or unique key violations, primary key violations, which is technical speak for you're trying to put something in the database that the database doesn't allow. And so we've added a new layer into the system where those common messages are translated now into using our standard Insight messages functionality that we use for all our other error messaging. Those anticipated messages are intercepted, and we provide a translation for them, and they are turned into a much more informative type of error message. So instead of just saying you violated a check constraint, we've turned it into your inactive date is before your effective date, and you can't do that. So we've done 95% at least of all of the messages already pre-translated. If there is a message that comes up that is still showing sort of the SQL version of that data, it can be corrected and adjusted. Or if you would rather put your own interpretation of that message to provide more information to a user, especially if you have one that happens a lot, then you can use our standard glossary messages translations to revise the message. So this has been an often asked for solution that we finally found a way to do in an intelligent way that maximizes the sort of usability and flexibility of it. There is a details button here so that you can see the technical gobbledygook if you like that sort of thing. But again, we're just trying to make it much more user friendly. Okay, so now I'm just sort of going by functional area. So order management, we've simplified the behavior of price rule overrides to try to make it easier to manage them. So let me go back to my sales orders here. So especially if I have an order with lots of line items on it, and especially in those maybe have lots of prices and possibly multiple overrides per line, and I have 1,000 lines on my order and I need to review those overrides. It can be quite tedious to go through, each line item and look at every individual, set of prices and one at a time. So what we've done is consolidated an additional view, so I can still see the overrides on an order line by order line basis. Here's the box that shows an overridable value, so I'm just going to override that one. In addition to what I'm going to show next, we've also greatly simplified this warning message, the warning message that says whether price overrides are there, do you want to reset them or not. Depending on which version you have, the older versions, you would get this box multiple times unless you had a little checkbox that said, essentially yes to all, go ahead and either leave them all or update them all. This has been completely simplified now to either continue, which by default leaves the overrides in place, or if I check the box, will reset all overrides. There's no line-by-line dialogue anymore. In addition to that, if you never want to reset price rules, you can suppress this warning with a setting. So in the system set configuration, there's a setting that says suppress price override warning, and then the system will never automatically reset the overrides. You will have to do that, as a user. But if I do want to have a more complete overview on the order header pricing tab, we still have the order prices, and I can see overrides, here for the order prices. But down under where I had, price aggregation and accruals, there's a new tab called line overrides, and I can see all my order line price rules and all of my overrides. Overridden values are highlighted in orange, so that I can more easily see just the pricing picture of the order. And I can make edits here, so I can change an override. I can reset to the default value, just one or more at a time. And I can reprice the order from here. So it gives me a much nicer sort of view of all of the pricing on the sales order in one place. So we're hoping that's going to make override management, if you have a lot of it, a lot easier to manage and to deal with. You do need to, I created this layout, so I used a sorted by outline number and price rule sequence. And I did use the merge cells function to kind of group all of the price rules together, because what I'm seeing here, these are individual price rules. So I'm sorting them by sequence and then grouping by, or using the merge cells function so that I see all lines that belong to one sales order line here. So I hope that makes sense to those of you who work with the grid controls. Okay. Another enhancement we've made to price elements is the ability to create what we're calling, to price rules is something called price elements. And that's the ability to create user-defined subtotals that essentially add up selected price rules. The easiest way to see that here is in my, whoops, wrong form, sales order inquiry. Yeah, my screenshot's better because I have data in there. Bear with me. What price elements are is just a sort of a category in a sense. But when you add a price element through a new lookup table called price elements, once those elements exist, when you're in a price list, you can go into the price rule, price price rule value sets within a price list and assign them to one or more of those categories. Those categories can be linked to header prices or to line prices, not both. But any price rules within that price list that belong to a category will be calculated as just added together into a subtotal for that category. So when I have a sales order that, once prices are calculated, this data is stored with the sales order. So we have, for example, in Europe, there's something called an intrastat report that the EU requires that is sort of I think, like a taxable value of net sales, for the month that they have to report. And sometimes it includes taxes or discounts, sometimes it doesn't, and there's different rules depending on where you're shipping it and so on. So there's a lot of customization that our customers have done to try to get at that value, but the raw data is in the pricing data. So this allows them to essentially automatically calculate this intrastat, and that is an out-of-the-box. These first 4 price elements are standard system price elements that are available. You still have to assign price rules to them, but they're predefined with the system. You can choose whether they're enabled or not, and you can add your own element definitions as well. So if you've got things you need for reporting, or you want to, if you're in the office industry and you want to show list and then net, and that net either includes or doesn't include taxes, or however you decide to calculate that, then you can build those rules within the system and hopefully take those kinds of summaries out of reporting logic or maybe custom, calculations you're doing somewhere on the side. So the goal there is, again, we just have a lot of requests for specialty totaling of certain price rules, and this is an infrastructure to support that. Again, those are stored with the order in the database, but they are visible in the sales order inquiry, both for the order header level and for the order line level. So on the pricing tabs at both levels, there's a new tab for price elements where you can see the values that were calculated. And if I click on one of these, it will show which price rule values were included in that calculation. And so, for example, here, again, I've got a $500 value, which was a sum of both, a list price and a discount in this case. So it takes into account the positive or negative values and just sums them together. Another change that we've made, or just something we've added to the system, is a new system property, criteria property, called sales order line canceled state. What it really means is the sales order line status equal to the canceled milestone or not? And what this is designed to do is to support things like resetting an order line price to 0 when the line is canceled. That's always been a bit of a challenge because it's heavily reliant on workflow and just making sure that things go through all the right sequences. This is now more of just a state that's available. You can check it at any point in time to know, is this line in a canceled state or not? If it is, then you can, take action based on that. So the typical example is in an order line workflow, if I cancel a sales order line, I run an action to, for example, to run the sales order validation and reprice the order. Then I can reference this criteria property, for example, within a price rule that is a reset price rule that gets invoked when I run pricing. That says if the state is equal to 1, then my price equals 0, or whatever you want to do there. So you can reference this criteria property in a price rule as a way to automate making sure that the right things happen with pricing when they're when a line is canceled. All right, next I'm going to move into purchasing and inventory. So one of the enhancements we've made is that you can create call-off POs. If you use blanket POs in purchasing, you can now automatically create a call-off purchase order if there is a blanket quantity available from within purchase stock control and purchase demand. Previously, within those forms would only create a new standard PO type. And if you had a blanket, then you would have to manually go, kind of delete that one and add a blanket or a call-off PO. This now will detect whether there is a blanket quantity available for this item that's unused, and if it is, it offers it, and you have a checkbox. You can choose whether you use it or not when you're calculating or generating purchase orders from suggestions within the purchase stock control, or when you're generating purchase orders from purchase demand. So we've added columns into the grids for available quantities and a checkbox to say, yes, please use the blanket, and it will create a call-off in that case. There is automation in place when those POs are created. If there's not enough blanket quantity to cover the entire PO quantity, then we will use up the blanket quantity and, take it down to 0, and the remaining quantity will be put on a standard PO, a separate standard PO automatically. We've also added a new system action for reversing inventory transactions. This lives on the inventory transactions form. So it is a manual transaction, but if somebody makes a mistake somewhere, you can go find that inventory transaction. For example, reversing an issue. I can select the transaction I need to reverse, and there is a process reverse inventory transaction action on that form by default, and you simply put in the location where you're going to put it back into. In this case, you can put a comment in, and it supports specific types of transactions. There's certain ones, and I don't remember if I listed them here. I believe it's in the help, but or the action description describes which action or inventory transaction types are supported here. And that will do what you would imagine. It makes a sort of a negative transaction, reverses the GL entries if you're integrating to a financial system, and kind of just like an undo for inventory. Okay. Next is shop floor related enhancements. One of the bigger changes we've made is the ability to now on calculating costs and piece rate values in routing operations. In version 9 we added the ability, or maybe it was 8, I don't remember. We added the ability to reference a calculated item property, so that beyond this typical each square area units of measure, you could sort of create your own either multiplier value or sort of calculated unit of measure for calculating cost on your routing operations. In version 10, we've now extended that to also support the scripting formula. So I do have an example of that one in one of these places. So if I go into an operation, and I've made an example here where I can use either the unit of measure, which is our, sort of the out-of-the-box default units of measure for each or square area. I can use an item property, so we didn't get rid of that ability. This means I have to create a calculated property on the item, calculate a value for it, and then that value is referenced and multiplied by the hours and the rate. And now I can use a scripted formula. Note that this user interface has changed a little bit. There used to be a little button here within the field with 3 dots on it that would open up the bigger window. Now it's opened with a double click. There is a little hint there, double click to open the dialog. And I can use a standard scripting formula, you know, with the you know, type ahead function in here that lists the available properties for this functional use. And so if I need to do some fancy math, I can do that, but it's done. The difference between using the formula on the operation and the item property is that the operation formula is calculated during instance processing and recalculated when necessary at work order creation. So it's a much more dynamic and flexible way to more of a real-time calculation versus an item property, because an item property, once it's calculated, it's calculated. If you need to change it, now you're into some kind of manual update. But if, for example, if I'm using these formulas for calculating a piece rate, what this allows me to do is, instead of assigning an if I have 5 operations that I calculate piece rates for, using the item property method, I have to add 5 properties to every item that goes through that area in order to determine the piece rate. Well, now I don't have to have anything on the item. I can just put the formula on the operation itself. And this does support our SQL function call, so that if you have like a lookup table, for example, where you manage all your piece rates, you can just reference the SQL function within this formula to say, go look up the piece rate for this item based on whatever, you know, logic you need to have in there. And then if a rate changes, you just update the rate, and the next time a routing uses that operation, it will get the latest rate. So it's a much, especially for piece rate based calculations, it's a lot more real time and easier to keep up to date without maintaining data on all of the different items that might go through this operation. So it's a kind of maximum flexibility there. Another place where we've deployed the formula engine now is on process group definitions for dynamic container maximum container items. So in other words, this is when you have a process group and you define dynamic containers, you're required to say, what's the maximum number of things we can put in this container? Well, if this is a stack height based decision, that number can actually change depending on the thickness of the panel, for example. So if 4 feet is my max and I'm using 1-inch panels, you know, then I can do 48 panels. But if they're 1/4 inch, I can do a lot more. But historically, this, you know, the only way to do that was to actually create parallel process groups and kind of lots of rules about putting the right part types into the right process groups. So now we've created the ability to assign a formula to calculate that max number of items based on the item family itself. And I can maintain these formulas from the item family and from the process groups form. So here you see the process groups form. There's an item families tab. I can link an item family. And this is like an override. I can still define a maximum, a default maximum, but this is an override value that I can then say, you know, for example, if my thickness is less than 15, it's this, and if it's between 15 and 25, it's that. And it will allow me to have a simpler process group definition, but still make sure, in this case, a stack height doesn't, you know, reach my, you know, doesn't violate safety requirements and things like that. Same thing if, you know, I've had different numbers of slots on a cart that, again, usually it seems like it's panel thickness that is one of the most common determinations, but it could be size, right? I can only put 3 tops on a you know, work surfaces on a cart, but I can put 50 end panels. So just gives you, again, some more flexibility to let the system make the right decisions based on a rule and without, hopefully, you know, having to do customization to get the right output for the shop floor. Okay, I'm going to speed up here because I do want to leave about 10 minutes for questions. We have added a checkpoint sign-in type. We've had user sign-in, employee, you know, login capability for some time. In the last major release, we added the ability to do some basic actual labor time tracking. But now we've added just a further refinement there, which is the ability to define whether a given checkpoint allows an operator to be signed in at multiple checkpoints or not. So, for example, if I have two single sign-in checkpoints, if I'm signed in at checkpoint A and then I go sign in at checkpoint B, the system will automatically sign me out of checkpoint A. So just again, this may or may not be something you need, but we have some customers who want to make sure that only one person can be logged in on a checkpoint at a time so that they don't actually scan and give credit to the wrong user for certain operations, that kind of thing. So multi-sign-in, they can be signed in multiple checkpoints at the same time. Single sign-in, if I'm signed in somewhere else, it logs you out automatically when you sign in here. We've also added some more control for sort of validation of scanning. So whether you allow, you can control now whether you allow off-routing scans or allow a checkpoint within the operation to be skipped. You can leave both of those either enabled or disabled, and it kind of works the old way, but this provides sort of a tighter scan validation so that if you want to make sure something that the scans always happen in sequence, you can disallow checkpoint skipping. And if you want to allow someone to scan at a checkpoint that's not on the routing for that work order, then you can, enable or disable that allow off route, and the system will provide warning messages. It won't log entries, for an invalid scan. Again, the PowerPoint contains the text here that explains that. These are available only if you have enable work order operations turned on in the system. So if you're not instantiating work order operations, we can't validate. All right, now moving to sort of some general things. We do have a 64-bit Insight client application now. There are a few limitations. If you're integrating in real time using, like a direct call to a third-party application, and that application is 32-bit, you might only be able to get that to work with the 32-bit client, but there is a 64-bit client available. Just gives you access to a lot more local memory. It probably is a bigger impact on those of you using things like terminal server or Citrix clients, where you, can access more memory on those machines to provide better performance to your end users. We've done a few more improvements to the form control properties, Dialog. We talked about the database errors and adding contacts. Big thing on the field properties, again, if you're on an older version, you may not be aware of this, but if I go into a field in Insight now, or click on a button, if I right-click, I can say, if I have the user right to do this, I can say Show Properties, and this allows me to control the behavior of that field. So I can assign default values. I can type in either my username or globally. I can implement form controls. So if I simply give this field a description, then I can actually now, the enhancement we have is that I can control the restriction right from here. I don't have to save this and then go back to the user groups form and then add the restrictions. I can actually do the restrictions right now. So I can say, okay, I'm going to restrict this field, disable it for order entry. In addition to disabling, I can also make that behavior status dependent now. So I can say when the sales order status is greater than 1500, then I disable this field. You do have to be careful that you select the correct origin ID, and it is a cascading thing. So if I do this on an order line field, I can reference the order status or the order line status. But if I'm editing a sales order header field, I can't reference the sales order line or the production order status. That, it doesn't go, it's not that sophisticated. But this does give you a little more, again, a little more control over how the user interaction occurs, and it is, depending on the situation, can be status sensitive. And you can do inline translation on that control as well. We've also added the properties concept to grid controls. So if I'm in the sales order grid and I don't want certain users to see a certain column, then I can right-click and say Show Properties here, and I get that form control restriction. And I can do the same types of, we can restrict access to columns in the forms now as well. We have added some new system charts that are manufacturing related, so things like percent of shipment on time versus the original date, average days to complete a production order, so on. Those are system charts that if you have the BI module, you have automatic access to. We've added some specific form controls for pricing, and they will apply to any form that contains that value. So things like, these are some sort of specific order price information that if you just want to hide pricing data from specific users, you can now use these global form controls and disable or hide pricing from both form details and grids. As always, we're always working to improve performance just across the board anywhere we can. And then lastly, a few technical changes. There is a new GenPost standalone application that you do have access to if you're an Insight customer and you have the Universal Post Processor. It's just a standalone GenPost exe that allows you to open up programs, do manual editing, mainly for testing and validation, that kind of thing. So if you do upgrade, let us know, and that if you're interested in that, and you'll get the application and the right for one user out of the box just by default if you have the GenPost module. Database-wise, we have kind of come full circle, and we're merging DBO order items MFG and non-MFG into DBO, into a single table now for performance reasons. There are views in the database with these original names for backward compatibility, but over time, so that your upgrade should be transparent, but if you want to start modifying reports over time, just to get them to look at order items, it might simplify some queries for you. There's lots of deep technical reasons for doing this, but they're essentially around performance based on how we're seeing customers actually use this data. And we have dropped support for the SQL-based BOM processor. So essentially, there used to be a system setting for Enable Advanced BOM processor. Now it's just enabled by default. And the old processor is no longer supported. So we've done quite a bit of analysis. We don't expect any impact on existing bill of material data. But as always, we do recommend testing and validating a cross-section of data before you go live with an upgrade. And if you do run into trouble, please let us know as soon as possible, and we'll be happy to work through any issues with you. A little bit about the timeline. Version 10.1 is scheduled for release at the end of January, and then we have quarterly releases ongoing. Support for version 8 is now dropped, and we're supporting 9. You'll see regular service packs for 9 through the next year. We are going to be doing quite a bit of enhancements as well as just bug fixes in the 2016 service packs. We're trying to do some acceleration on just a large backlog of customer requests. So you will see more enhancements than usual in the version 10 service packs. But thanks a lot for your time today, and we hope to talk to you soon about doing an upgrade.